In 2012, the world's press was full of reports about North Korea. Dictator Kim Jong-il had died in December 2011, and now everyone was wondering what North Korea would be like under the leadership of his son, 28-year-old Kim Jong-un. An old Asian proverb says, "Seeing with your own eyes is better than hearing 1,000 reports." So in early 2013, my friend Philip and I decided to visit North Korea. The first challenge lay in actually booking the trip. We normally plan our trips abroad ourselves, but individual tourism doesn't exist in North Korea. Even booking the entry and departure arrangements are dealt with by a state agency. Before entering the country, we had to sign a paper declaring that our visit had no journalistic purpose. We had to get permission if we wanted to take photos and film, and sound recordings were forbidden. All the following material was shot on a camera with a built-in video function. I hid the blinking red recording light with black sticky tape. We were only vaguely aware of the hot water we might end up in, but we still wanted to smuggle as much footage as possible back to Germany. But then we still hadn't really worked out what to do with it. There are several ways to get to North Korea. We decided on a 25-hour train journey from Beijing to Pyongyang. When we arrived in Pyongyang, we were met at the station by two guides. They were to be something like our guards for the next 7 days. Pyongyang has 3 million inhabitants and only 2 hotels for foreign visitors. We were booked into the Koryo Hotel. It looked like we were to be given a private guided tour of the nation's achievements. We would be driven from door to door and not allowed to go out without our guards.
Do you have your flight tickets?
Flights back to Germany?
Yes, your e-tickets.
Here's from Pyongyang to Beijing,
Okay.
and here from Beijing to Munich.
You will not need your passports within North Korea. When you have a North Korean guide, you don't need a passport. You can go anywhere. But you are not allowed to leave the hotel without your guides. I can show you all the places of interest. And that is what we will do.
There was a lot of excitement in the hotel lobby. It was the 27th of July, 2013, Victory Day. Many international guests had come here, especially for this event. It marks the end of the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. The fighting was brought to a close by the signing of an armistice agreement. But North and South Korea are technically still at war. According to South Korean media reports, this was the first time that Victory Day had been celebrated with a military parade since 1993, with thousands of soldiers marching past and driving by in tanks. It stunk horribly of gasoline. Vehicles with loudspeakers had been driving through the city all week, belting out slogans and martial music. Even days later, the continuous racket took some getting used to. North Korea's armed forces were omnipresent. We were always alone in the bus because we had booked an individual trip. That means we had the whole tour bus to ourselves, apart from our omnipresent minders.
North Korea gets support from the World Hunger Relief Organization. Have you heard that? Is it true?
Sure. Nearly all developing countries get help. But I don't really know a lot. It doesn't play such a big role. I don't know where World Hunger Aid actually operates from. I don't know where the poor people live.
You mean you don't see them?
No.
We soon realized that conversations of this kind were barely possible. Whenever we started a discussion with one of our guides, the other one would often jump in and stop it. And we got the feeling they weren't only keeping tabs on us, but also on each other. Of course, we couldn't ask that, at least not if we wanted to leave the country in one piece with our footage. Once we got back home, we asked Dr. Rüdiger Frank, a professor of East Asian economy and society at the University of Vienna, about it. If anyone can explain how North Korea works, it's him.
In North Korea, people who deal with foreigners are rarely able to do so alone, but are always at least in pairs. And the whole point of this is mutual surveillance. They both also have to write reports about their encounters. The reports are then compared and checked to see if there are any inconsistencies, so that you can never be sure whether you, as a North Korean who has had contact with a foreigner, have gone unobserved. That is also a very effective system of self-censorship.
North and South Korea are separated by the so-called DMZ, the demilitarized zone. On the way there, we hardly met any cars coming toward us, which wasn't surprising, because nobody can cross the border in either direction anyway.
The demilitarized zone is a 2-kilometer wide strip on either side of an imaginary demarcation line, in other words, a 4-kilometer wide strip, stretching about 250 kilometers across the Korean peninsula from one coast to the other. It was created to guarantee the ceasefire in the Korean War and is now still the de facto border between the two Koreas. At one point, you can walk or drive through the DMZ and get directly to the demarcation line. There are the sky blue barracks where ceasefire negotiations took place in 1951 to 53, and where talks between both sides are still taking place today. The border runs right through the middle of these barracks, so you have a kind of neutral area, so to speak, where officials can talk to each other without officially having to enter each other's country.
But we still didn't really understand how reunification was supposed to work. What did the citizens of this rigidly socialist state with its omnipresent leadership cult imagine a reunified Korea would look like? Would it be a capitalist country?
When South and North reunite, we want it to be one nation and one government with two systems. We want our own sovereignty and a peaceful reunification, bringing together the entire nation.
Eine Nation, ein Staat, zwei Systeme.
Two systems, socialism and capitalism. Two governments.
Kapitalismus. Zwei Regierungen.
Denkst du, es kann funktionieren?
You think it could work?
Es kann funktionieren.
So ein System?
Es muss funktionieren.
It could work. In fact, it has to.
Weil
I think it can work because nobody will be oppressed.
sein Eigentum
Everyone can own their own property.
System bewahren, die
South Korea can remain capitalist, and we can still be socialist, but both united.
And you think it will work?
Wäre es für dich vorstellbar?
Could you imagine relinquishing socialism in the interest of reunification?
Aber wir würden unser sozialistisches
Could you imagine that?
Könntest du das dir auch unter dieser Bedingung vorstellen?
No.
Aber rein hypothetisch.
Just hypothetically,
Also nur von der Vorstellung.
just an
Von der
idea.
Vorstellung her. Dass man sagt, man würde sich wieder vereinen,
You would reunite,
aber
but you would have to give up socialism in order to be reunited.
aufgeben müssen dafür. Aber dafür ist man
Would you
wieder
do that?
Würdest du nicht machen. Und würdest
No.
du denken, die
Do you believe
Südkoreaner
South Korea would ever adopt socialism to become one nation again?
würden Wiedervereinigung, würden sie sozialistisch werden?
위생술에 들어가 있는 사람 있어요? 조금만 좀.
Our question went unanswered. Nobody had overheard our conversation, and our watchdog had only expressed loyalty to the regime. Nevertheless, a new guide turned up in the evening. We could only assume that the old one had decided to avoid us. That was a bit odd, because in fact, we got on well with our guides. We even found out about their private lives. I said being on the road with tourists for up to 2 weeks at a time must have been exhausting, and inquired how they coped with it. One guide said his marriage had collapsed, so the job actually suited him. Another told me about his 4-year-old daughter, who he missed, and who, like my niece, liked Disney films. Basically, the same discussions we had at home. But at least we could get a personal glimpse into North Koreans' everyday lives. The US Air Force dropped an estimated 450,000 tons of bombs and more than 30,000 tons of napalm on North Korea during the war. Some 90% of Pyongyang was destroyed. You can see the scale of the devastation in today's cityscape. We Berliners may be familiar with socialist architecture from East Germany, but Pyongyang looks like a combination of the 1970s and some futuristic science fiction vision. At first glance, we couldn't make out any sort of social infrastructure at all, and would have been lost without our guides, which wasn't the sort of thing we normally experienced. Once we were back in Berlin, we talked to Philipp Moise, who's an architect and also the editor of the Architectural and Cultural Guide to Pyongyang.
Pyongyang ist eine Stadt, die war vor dem Koreakrieg.
Before the Korean War,
eine
Pyongyang was a
alte
homogeneous old
Und das,
city.
was eben passiert ist, eben nach dem Krieg, ist eben, dass man wirklich
But after the
Tabula rasa
war,
gemacht hat,
they
dass man
changed the
alte
entire city
Strukturen
beyond all
abgebaut hat.
recognition,
Und weil natürlich
completely
der Staat
sweeping away the old
Zugriff hat auf Grund
structures.
und Boden, das heißt, die Eigentumsverhältnisse überhaupt keine Rolle spielen.
Ownership rights weren't a problem because the state owned everything anyway.
Super, ich kann jetzt echt mal planen, was ich mal machen
This was
wollte.
great for the city planners, who could finally plan things the way they wanted and create utopias.
Schmalen Gassen und
So that's what happened here. These narrow, winding alleys were replaced by wide main roads and modern multi-story buildings.
Architecture and ideology are inextricably entwined in North Korea. Pyongyang's new urban design took its orientation from the Taedong River and laid down myriad axes connecting the most important monuments by line of sight. The most important visual axis links the so-called Grand Monument of Mansu Hill with the one commemorating the foundation of the North Korean Communist Party. Sungri Street is the city's main artery. It connects the Victory Arch with Mansu Hill. And the symbolic center of Pyongyang, Kim Il-sung Square. From there, you can look across the river to Juche Tower in the eastern part of the city. Symbols of the Kim dynasty's personality cult are everywhere. Time and again, we came across portraits, life-size wax figures or statues of the 3 generations of supreme leaders. I mean, have you ever bowed down to a statue wearing a parka? In this respect, our visit to the 20-meter-tall Grand Monument on Mansu Hill was an absolute highlight. All visits follow a strict procedure. The deep bow is obligatory, so we saved ourselves the trouble of questioning this out loud and did everything we were told to do. After all, it was strictly forbidden to film without the knowledge of the guides. So we didn't want to attract any unnecessary scrutiny.
Okay, don't point. Gregor, lay the flowers there, please, and come back to us. Then we will bow together.
In addition to kowtowing, you also have to buy a bunch of plastic flowers each time you visit, frequently fake pink or red orchids. Later, we noticed the flowers were collected up and brought back to the stand to be sold again. Next stop, Kim Il-sung Square, which covers an area of 75,000 square meters and is used as a parade ground. It's an incredible amount of open space in the middle of the city. Numerous small white dots and numbers have been painted on the ground so that everyone knows what to do during a parade. If you look across the Taedong River, you can see the Juche Tower, the monument to North Korea's official cult of self-reliance. 170 meters tall, it commemorates the great achievements of the country's first supreme leader, Kim Il-sung, who founded the Juche ideology in the 50s. Now it has grown into a quasi-religion, and the deceased Kims are worshipped like deities. As you can imagine, the Juche ideology is at the very heart of the North Korean system. It also gives its name to the Juche calendar used here, which is calculated from the year of Kim Il-sung's birth.
Which God do you believe?
In myself.
Yeah, religion, I mean.
In myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. In myself.
Yourself. Don't
Yes.
believe, you don't
No,
believe any God. And how about you?
I'm actually Christ, but yeah, not the best Christ probably out there.
Maybe many foreigners, most foreigners believe the God, Christian, Buddhism, what Islamic, was various kinds. But in our country, we believe Juche idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is so, in our country, the Juche idea is a sort of religion. But really, it is religion. It means our man.
Yeah.
We believe man.
Have you read some of them, or?
Maybe many of them.
Many, yeah?
And during the university, we studied that
Okay.
as one subject.
Okay.
Okay, so what does it say here?
Our socialist is the one that initiate the Juche idea. Our socialist means our socialism is our own style socialism. It is man-centered socialism. It is Juche idea. You know, Juche idea is man is the owner of everything, and man must have the man what decides everything. It is the Juche idea.
yeah, we have a similar history.
Yes,
Your country and
in
our country.
It's very difficult to reunify because of several issues in North Korea and South Korea.
What issues, for example? What do you mean?
I don't know. It's sort of politics. I'm not interested in politics and maybe the economy or the idea. The idea is very different.
Yes.
In what's in South Korea is capitalist.
Yes.
They are only think about money, but in
Yes.
our country it's not capital socialist. We only think of our man,
Yes.
our leader, our party, but they don't care who is president, who is what. They don't care. They only think the money. So the idea is very different. And then economy is also different. They maybe they have developed economy in South Korea, and the living standard is much higher than us. But
You think so? It's higher?
yes, I think so. They are.
Okay.
Yes,
How do you know?
interesting.
How do you know?
I think we've learned, but in past times we've learned that the South Korea is rather what's poor and what's not developed it, but after maybe 10 years later they developed it much. And
Yes.
in what TV news and some foreigners said that the South Korea is rather developed it what's economy. Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for all the information.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for my poor English.
Your English is really, really
thank
good.
you.
No, seriously. Bye.
예, 수고하셨습니다.
Off to our next appointment, which was one of the most exciting of our whole trip. There was a huge crowd here, and there was a lot of excitement in the air. 2 soldiers led some guy away, obviously against his will. But there was no time to find out more, because Arirang was starting. Arirang! I have never seen such an impressive artistic performance. More than 100,000 people took part in this display of dance and gymnastics. Thousands of children in the terraces held up colored cards, creating a sort of mosaic effect. Then they all flipped them at the same time and formed a new pattern. The Arirang Festival takes place in the Rengrado 1st of May Stadium, which is said to hold 100,114 people and is the biggest in the world. Arirang was one of the most incredible events we had ever seen. We asked our guides how North Korea managed to get everyone to join in. To answer our question, they took us to the so-called Mangyeongdae Children's Palace the next day. The Mangyeongdae Children's Palace is run by the Youth Corps of North Korea and offers members of the Young Pioneer Movement the chance to take part in a wide range of extracurricular activities. Some 4,000 children attend its classes. Schools like this play a crucial role in North Korean education. We were taken to various classrooms where groups of children were already waiting for us. Music, sports, dance, arts and crafts. The children, some of them still quite young, amaze us with their skills. I wondered if I would have ever been able to do that at that age, and how much effort it took to achieve that level of perfection. But at least I now understand a bit more about why a child would want to be part of a huge human mosaic for several hours. It didn't take us long to realize how hard it was to get any real idea of this country of staged superlatives. We asked a lot of questions, but could rarely choose the topics. That's probably why we left North Korea feeling we knew even less than we had when we arrived. Of course, our experiences only scratch the surface of what life in North Korea is really like. Nevertheless, I felt I was edging a little closer to an answer. I could now sense a little of what it must be like to live in a totalitarian state, where you can't express your opinions openly and have to play along out of fear of punishment. In fact, I was really relieved when I got on the plane back to Beijing. Filming in secret had been a huge strain, but now it was lifted. I was left with so many deep impressions that would remain with me for a long time to come. It was an exciting trip, but I didn't think I would be going back to North Korea anytime soon. Not, that is, until I found out you could also run a marathon in Pyongyang. After all, I had recently been part of a team that had run through the desert from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Running is my passion, so why not a marathon in Pyongyang? It's the only way to get around the city without a chaperone.
Interestingly, though, Mr. Pollack, in the past week...
But this year, growing tensions between North Korea and the US threatened to prevent us from going back there at all. As we prepared to leave, both countries were engaged in an aggressive war of words. So just in case, we registered on the German Foreign Office's Crisis Preparedness website. When we arrive, we meet our watchdogs for the next 2 weeks.
Second time for you.
Yes.
Did you
Yeah.
have a good time?
We had the 60-year celebration of the Korean Wars. We really liked it. Yeah.
A lot seemed to have changed since our visit in 2013. New residential areas had been built, and Pyongyang was no longer completely blacked out. At least not on the days before and after the marathon.
That's a new skyscraper there, right? Wow, it's huge. The one with the lights in the back? Very beautiful.
During our first night at the hotel, I started to feel sick. Probably something I'd eaten in the past 24 hours. Still, we managed to visit the Pyongyang subway. It's the deepest underground railway network in the world. Riding the subway in Pyongyang is a highlight for every Berliner. At the end of the 90s, Berlin sold several subway trains to North Korea, and they're still in service today. On the escalator, I notice a very pleasant contrast to our stations at home: the lack of advertising. Nothing was screaming out at us to buy things. Instead of advertising posters, the walls were faced with elaborately designed mosaics, although their colorful motifs were steeped in official propaganda. Apart from the portraits of Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong-il, the carriages were still in their original condition. The windows still even had the scratches left by the removal of graffiti back in Berlin. The underground system was started in the late 60s and now has around 30 stations. During our visit, I started to feel even worse and had an accident on the escalator. I headed straight back to the hotel. Unfortunately, this morning I had a massive stomach problem after breakfast. When we went to the subway, that is down the escalator, I couldn't hold it anymore. This gastrointestinal bug, whatever it is, has really hit me. The only problem is, I'm supposed to run the marathon tomorrow. I'll wait until tomorrow morning, but it can't go on like this. Let's see what the night brings. It was April 12th, 2017. The day of the 4th marathon in Pyongyang, where foreigners could take part. This year was special. Before, the participants had to run 4 10-kilometer laps around the stadium. Now, for the first time, the course took us 21 kilometers around the city and back again. But because of the bug, my stomach was empty, and I was really dehydrated. When we entered the stadium for the first time, we saw a crowd of some 40,000 had turned out to cheer us on. Yesterday I was still standing in the bathroom and couldn't hold anything in at all, but today, after 3 bananas and some toast, I am going to try to run. Let's see how far I get. We left the stadium and ran past the Victory Arch. People were at the roadside cheering the runners on. I can only guess who was ordered to be here and who was here voluntarily. All that mattered to me right now is that they were here to give us some support. Kilometer 7, and I'm still doing okay. I've now got 16 kilometers behind me. I'm surprised I could take part at all.
Ja, sehr überrascht, dass ich überhaupt antreten konnte.
"12 kilometers to go. I'm already dead beat. By the 30-kilometer point, the water supplies had run out. As the 10-kilometer and half-marathon courses followed the same route, it was the last bottle of water I got for the rest of the race. By the time I got to the finish line, I felt like I was drying out from the inside. But there was no water there either. I usually rest after a marathon and try to do something good for my body. And I especially needed to do that now. But as in 2013, our 2017 trip was also crammed full of information and sightseeing stops. So instead of going back to our hotel, we grabbed our bags and set off on a 4-hour drive across the country. Our destination, Masikryong, North Korea's only ski resort. It's located in the east of the country. This modern hotel is part of the resort. In the evening, we went to a nearby restaurant for a Korean barbecue. After a few bottles of rice wine and a really nice dinner, we asked our guides and the restaurant staff to sing karaoke for us. They performed Arirang.
Arirang is the name of a folk song about a young woman who sings to her lover in the hope that he will return to her as soon as possible. It's actually a very normal story, and of course it expresses the suffering of separation, in this case between two people. But if you then apply it to the situation of the two Koreas nowadays, Arirang creates a common ground based on a shared national identity.
Arirang is a very important symbol for both North and South Korea. At the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyongyang, it was the common anthem for the athletes from both Koreas. One of the biggest South Korean TV stations is called Arirang TV, and North Korea has the Arirang Gymnastics Festival that we visited in 2013. Both are named after this old folk song. At the Kwanbox supermarket, we got a glimpse into the lives of a small segment of the North Korean population. It's one of only 3 supermarkets selling foreign products, mainly from Thailand or China. and you can only pay with the North Korean currency, the won. That was different, because otherwise, we always had to pay in euros or dollars. Besides the supermarkets, some other things in North Korea seem to have changed too, although we could only judge this by appearances. In 2013, for example, many houses in Pyongyang were gray and infested with mold, whereas in 2017, they had been painted in peach and turquoise hues. The people were also wearing brighter colors and a wider range of styles, and we also saw more international sports brands in the streets. The larger portions of food also gave us the impression that things had changed since 2013. We even saw US products on sale. Not everything we saw in North Korea was bad, although of course there was plenty to worry about. But some things were really beautiful, and some were just too good to be true. You could still feel the tension and sense that people weren't saying what was on their minds, but sometimes it also felt strangely intimate. Was it because we were together all the time, or because I liked my guides regardless of the regime or their worldview? I'm glad I've seen North Korea for myself, at least as far as the constant surveillance allowed. All the impressions, experiences, and encounters we brought home were the very reason we had to go there in the first place.